I'd like to welcome everyone to the Strategic Forces Subcommittee's first open hearing of the 116th Congress. We meet today to receive testimony on the national security space enterprise. Appearing before the subcommittee, we have General David Thompson, Vice Commander of Air Force Special Command, General John Thompson, Commander of the Space and Missile Systems Center, Mr. Ken, Rapuano, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security, and Ms. Christina Chaplin, who directs the Government Accountability Office's work on military space programs. Thank you all for your service and for being here today. We meet at a time of increased focus on the space domain. And the last few years, we have seen a significant evolution in our approach to space. It's now widely recognized that space is a warfighting domain. It is also a domain in which adversaries are increasingly active and upon which our nation increasingly depends. Accordingly, we must ensure that our military space operations, policies, and programs are keeping pace with the changing environment, and we look forward to the testimony from our witnesses about the Department's effort in this regard. Their testimony today will help the subcommittee make informed decisions as we continue to craft the Defense Authorization Bill for fiscal year 2020. I would also like to note for my colleagues that the full committee will be holding a hearing on April 11th to discuss the Department's proposal to establish a Space Force. With that in mind, it is my intention to use my time today to talk about some of the other key equities in the national security space portfolio. And with that, I would turn to my colleague and ranking member, Senator Heinrich, for any comments.
Well, first, let me thank Chairwoman Fisher for holding today's hearing. This is our first together, and I look forward to future interactions on this subcommittee. Let me also thank our witnesses for taking the time to testify today. Between this subcommittee hearing on the fiscal year 2020 budget proposal and the full committee hearing on the proposed Space Force, there will be much to talk about relative to space in the coming weeks. At today's hearing, I want to concentrate on the threat we face in space, the budget submission to counter these threats, and organizational proposals to train and equip our space personnel. The idea of a Space Force is not new. The House proposed an almost identical concept in their fiscal year 2018 Defense Authorization Bill. It was dropped in conference, the Pentagon leadership opposed it, and as did several of our Senate colleagues. Having said that, it's no secret that the space domain is critical to our military operations, to our economy, and our way of life. As our adversaries become increasingly active in space, we certainly can't sit idly by. We must instead move with a greater sense of urgency and purpose. As an engineer, I continue to prioritize research and development and cannot stress enough the importance of fostering a culture of innovation and rapid acquisition within the space domain. Whether it's the creation of a space development agency or any larger reorganization, we also should not reinvent the wheel, nor move pieces around for the sake of saying we did so. We can always strive for our government to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars and for our military to operate more effectively. And I look forward to hearing how we may be able to do so. And again, thank you all for coming today, and I look forward to hearing all of your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. We will begin with opening statements. I would remind our witnesses today that your full statement will be included in the record. Mr. Secretary, if we could start with you, please.
Chairman Fisher, Ranking Member Heinrich, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is a pleasure to appear before you today, along with Lieutenant General D.T. Thompson, Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson, and Ms. Christina Chaplin. Space is a vital national interest. It underpins our economy and way of life, supporting our academia, agricultural, banking, and travel sectors, among others. Moreover, the rapidly growing commercial space sector offers enormous promise for the prosperity of Americans and our global partners. Commercial entities led by the United States are developing and delivering new space technologies and capabilities at a speed never seen before. Space is also crucial to the defense of the United States and our allies and partners. As outlined in the National Defense Strategy, long-term strategic competition is the central challenge to the United States, prosperity and national security. Space is key to this competition. China and Russia are developing military capabilities, doctrine, and organizations intended to place U.S. space systems at risk. They are developing a suite of anti-satellite weapons, including ground-launched missiles and directed energy weapons, and continue to launch experimental satellites that conduct sophisticated on-orbit activities to advance their counterspace capabilities. Many of these systems could be employed in the gray zone, that is, activities below the threshold of armed conflict, in a manner designed to hold U.S., allied, and partner capabilities at risk and limit our response options. The emergence of new, major state actors in space and the pace of the technological development are changing the character of warfare, presenting new challenges and opportunities to military space forces. No longer do space systems simply enable terrestrial forces to fight and win wars. Actions in space also will directly contribute to the outcome of future conflicts. In order to preserve peace and deter aggression, the Department of Defense must adapt. Without change, the United States is at risk of losing its comparative advantage in space. A loss of freedom to operate in space would undermine our nation's prosperity and erode the ability of the joint force to deter aggression, protect critical national defense and economic functions, assure our allies and partners, and project power globally. While the U.S. would prefer that space remain conflict-free, we must recognize rising challenges and overcome them. The Department must do more to accelerate its response to the changing dynamics of space by adapting our organizations, policies, doctrine, capabilities, and joint force employment to more effectively deter aggression, protect our interests, and enhance our lethality. Earlier this month, the Department provided Congress with a legislative proposal for the establishment of the U.S. Space Force as a new branch of our armed forces. If authorized, the Space Force will transform our approach to space by providing singular focus to maintaining and increasing our advantage in countering current and future threats. Establishing a sixth branch of our military with dedicated leadership will unify focus and accelerate the development of space doctrine, capabilities, and expertise to outpace future threats, institutionalize advocacy of space priorities, and further build space warfighting culture. The role of providing joint force employment of space capabilities lies with the U.S. Space Command, a unified combatant command focused on planning and executing joint space warfighting operations. Establishing U.S. Spacecom will bring full-time operational focus to securing the space domain and streamline command and control for time-sensitive operations. Additionally, the Department of Defense has undertaken a series of space acquisition reforms. These reforms, such as SMC 2.0, will continue to mature with the establishment of a joint space development agency dedicated to rapidly developing and fielding next-generation military space capabilities. The SDA will be empowered to go fast and will be pursuing a development of a transformational new architecture that leverages the investment taking place in the commercial sector. The Department looks forward to working closely with this committee and all of Congress to ensure that we maintain our freedom of operation in space to support our national security, our economic prosperity, and our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General J.T. Thompson. Welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Chairman Fisher, Ranking Member Chairman Fisher, Ranking Member Heinrich, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson, and I'm honored to appear before you today in my capacity as the Commander of Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center and the Air Force Program Executive Officer for Space. First of all, I'd like to apologize to you on behalf of the United States Air Force. Today, we provided two witnesses for the same hearing, both named Thompson, both lieutenant generals in leadership positions within Air Force Space Command. Since my primary duty location is Los Angeles Air Force Base in Los Angeles, California, and my fellow witness, Lieutenant General D.T. Thompson's duty location is here in the National Capital Region, Feel free to refer to me as West Coast Thompson and DT as East Coast Thompson. That's exactly what leadership does in the Pentagon. At SMC, I am honored to lead the 6,000 dedicated men and women, military, government civilians, and contractors who collectively have over 100,000 years of national security space acquisition experience. The SMC workforce is dedicated to providing premier national security space assets to support joint and allied forces for our nation. While America is absolutely the best in space, our adversaries have recognized the extent to which our space capabilities provide a strategic advantage and are working to deny the use of our capabilities with asymmetric advantages of their own. The space acquisition enterprise must adapt to deliver capabilities to outpace the threat. In order to meet the objectives of the National Defense Strategy, the Air Force is prioritizing investments in resilience, reconstitution, and operations. The Air Force space enterprise has greatly benefited from acquisition reforms instituted by the Congress. However, in order to truly address the threat, we must go farther. Recognizing the pace of space acquisitions was too slow, making it difficult to respond to the latest threats, we are changing the way we do business to get capability from the lab to the warfighter faster and smarter. Specifically, to speed up the pace of acquisitions, we're utilizing alternative congressionally approved acquisition approaches like other transaction authorities and rapid prototyping, which was granted under Section 804 of the fiscal year 2016 National Defense Authorization Act. SMC is also benefiting from the delegation of authority for some major defense acquisition programs down to the service acquisition level. With the help of Congress, the Air Force stood up the Space Rapid Capabilities Office, or SPACE RCO, which will continue to work in close concert with SMC to rapidly develop and acquire critical capabilities. Further, I delegated acquisition authorities for acquisition Category 3 programs down to the executive level within SMC, simply to speed decision-making. And finally, with the support of the Secretary of the Air Force and the Acting Secretary of Defense, SMC is undergoing a full transformation on how we operate, known as SMC 2.0. Although we have a strong history with partnerships with numerous DoD and intelligence community space activities, including the National Reconnaissance Office, Air Force Research Lab, NASA, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, under SMC 2.0, one of our principal tenets is to grow even greater partnerships with our allies, our sister civil and intelligence agencies, and commercial industry to speed up the pace of acquisition and our nation's legacy as the dominant space power. I'm grateful for the support of this committee and the Congress as we transition our space assets to meet and outpace the threat posed by near-peer adversaries. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss and defend the vital programs that SMC acquires to enable warfighting capabilities across the globe. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Next, we have General D.T. Thompson, and I believe you are referred to now as East Coast. But General, welcome.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Chairman Fisher, Ranking Member Heinrich, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored to appear before you along with these distinguished colleagues today. And today I represent our commander, General J. Raymond, the commander of Air Force Space Command. I'm privileged to be one of the 26,000 men and women of that command who serve under General Raymond's leadership. These men and women remain the best in the world at developing, fielding, operating, and sustaining vital space capabilities that serve our national leaders, our joint forces, allies and partners, and the world in general. The asymmetric advantage these capabilities provide ensure that our armed forces have no equal. Today, there is unprecedented agreement among the nation's leadership that space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, sea, and cyberspace. The National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy reflect this reality, emphasizing peace through strength while demanding that we maintain U.S. leadership and freedom of action in the space domain. Accepting that potential adversaries have made space a warfighting domain, we are now dealing with the implications. We are driving tremendous change in order to sustain our leadership and that freedom to operate in space. With your strong support, we are making significant advances to ensure the national security space enterprise is prepared to play its role in military operations under all conditions. The fiscal year 2020 budget builds on our efforts over the past 2 years, proposing a 17% increase in space funding over 2019 and a $14 billion investment overall. With my posture statement on the record, I'd like to summarize a few of its key points. First of all, we're increasing the lethality and readiness of our force as we continue to invest in and accelerate defendable space. Among that includes new, more defendable systems and architectures, the space domain awareness and command and control needed to operate in a contested domain, and an operational training infrastructure to develop space warfighters to the need. All of this enables us to sustain superiority in space so that we ensure we support joint warfighters operating in all domains around the globe. Second, we are enhancing and expanding partnerships with the intelligence community, allies and partners, and industry. This includes joint programs with the National Reconnaissance Office, hosted payloads with several of our allies and partners, and operations, training, exercises, and war games with allies that are building a coalition of like-minded nations. Finally, we're capitalizing on innovative business practices, including the re-architecting of Space and Missile Systems Center that West Coast Thompson mentioned and is leading, establishing a Space Rapid Capabilities Office, pursuing special practices and innovative agreements that drive those innovative activities across the broader commercial and industry base, and finally, adopting open architectures and standards to strengthen integration in multi-domain command and control and with the operations of the rest of the joint force. Let me close by reiterating that we do not want war to extend to space, but the best way to deter that from happening is to prepare to fight and win should deterrence fail. With your support, that's exactly what we're doing. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. Next, Ms. Chaplin, welcome.
Chairman Fisher, Ranking Member Heinrich, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me today to discuss DoD space programs. Space is at a pivotal point right now. In the face of growing threats and lengthy development cycles, DoD is embracing new approaches to help speed up acquisition of space systems, establish better partnerships with the commercial sector to increase innovation, and change its acquisition culture. There's also a proposal before Congress on strengthening leadership for space. Bringing about this broad span of change will be challenging, to say the least, and not without some risk. More specifically, while DoD is undertaking this change, it will need to concurrently focus on completing older programs that are still struggling. The ground system for GPS, known as OCX, for example, is nearly 5 years late, and while the contractor has improved the pace of building and testing the software, we still see a lot of schedule risk in that program. The Air Force also recently stopped development work on JMS, a ground system for processing space situational awareness data, because it didn't deliver as expected. We're also still faced with long gaps between the delivery of satellites and ground systems needed to make use of their capabilities. Moreover, there's a myriad of challenges facing space programs that are just getting underway. First, even with the new Space Force proposal, there's still a lot of open questions about leadership. For example, at this time, it appears there'll be a number of space acquisition activities outside of the Space Force, including the Missile Defense Agency, the NRO, and some military space service activities. But so far, it's uncertain what the overall governance structure will be, if there are conflicts in requirements, funding, or priorities between agencies that are not under the Space Force, who resolves them and makes a final decision. There's also a new entity being rolled out, the Space Development Agency, which has very worthwhile goals of developing or adopting innovative technologies for space. But at this time, it's unclear how it will mesh with other similar agencies, and also still unclear who's in charge of future architectures for space. These questions may well be resolved as details for the Space Force and SDA get worked out, but new programs will be operating with uncertainty for the time being. Second, while streamlining may help speed up programs and change the culture, we know from past efforts to streamline that there's also a risk of inviting programs to move too quickly and disregard the engineering and acquisition discipline that is so very important to space. Keep in mind that space is different than other types of weapons. You cannot easily fix satellites once they're in orbit. We consistently see programs suffer major setbacks because one quality procedure wasn't followed or one small flaw in one small part was not detected. This does not mean streamlining cannot be done or should not be done. It just means we should heed lessons from the past, maintain good insight, oversight, and expertise, and be prepared to cancel programs that falter. Third, there's a question about DoD's capacity to manage multiple new programs concurrently. Yes, there's a healthy increase being proposed for space, but consider at least 9 significant programs are getting underway. They will likely require heavy investments up front, and that DoD will also be seeking money for a new Space Force, for space protection, for a space development agency, and a new missile defense space layer, as well as for priorities outside of space, such as a nuclear triad. There are also questions about workforce capacity. We recently reported that just tracking who's in the space acquisition workforce is a challenge, and there are also gaps in technical expertise that will be stretched with multiple new programs. Moreover, all of the programs will be software intensive, these new programs, but DoD has challenges managing software. We recently found that space software programs struggle to effectively engage system users, which is critical to their success. We understand that many new programs are attempting to be more agile and to use more modern tools, but it remains to be seen how successful DoD can be in adopting these new ways. Again, good things are happening in space. There's attention from highest levels of government, more resources, and a recognition that different approaches and culture are needed. What's key to making this happen is not to lose focus on improving acquisition management and oversight, building capacity as we speed up programs, and continuing to reduce fragmentation. Thank you. This concludes my statement, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your opening statements. We'll begin questioning for the first round. I have a question for General Thompson, West Coast. As I'm sure you're aware, arguments are being made in the press against the way the Air Force has structured its efforts to replace the RD-180 and develop the next generation of launch systems. And I know that the terms of Phase 2 have not been finalized as of yet, so we have to be careful to keep our discussion very general. But I would ask that you talk us through some of the trade-offs that we need to keep in mind when we hear arguments against down-selecting to 2 providers or questioning the intent to split launches on that 60-40 between them. So help us understand some of the original thinking behind the way that this was structured, please.
Thank you, Chairman. That's a fantastic question. You know, 5 years ago, the Congress challenged us to get off Russian-made RD-180s and assure access to space using 2 domestic launch providers capable of launching to our most stressing national security space orbits. The Air Force rose to that challenge, competitively awarding technology maturation, rocket propulsion system, and launch vehicle service agreements to mature commercial technologies and capabilities for national security space assets. Industry rose to that challenge as well. We are ready to issue an RFP for the launch service procurements. All potential offerers have sufficient maturity, and we expect a full and open and robust competition. Award is anticipated in the spring of 2020. Offerers will be able to update their proposals throughout the evaluation period if they have technological maturities or design review completions. We're confident we're on the right path for our nation's warfighting capability and that we're being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. Madam Chairman, when you referenced the 60-40 split, the 60-40 split is really essential for us for 3 reasons. Number one is it gives us flexibility on the manifest to be able to move some of our nation's most important satellites from provider to provider. Number two, it's almost like a block buy concept where we're able to take advantage of competition and savings while still rewarding the best offerer. And then finally, which is something that I really need to articulate to everyone, is that 60-40 is a two-way split. A number of folks have asked us if it's possible to split it three ways. Our launch manifest that we need to purchase between 2020 and 2024 simply does not support three offerers in that trade space at the same time. None of the offerers' business cases would close if we tried to open it up to three different offers. Now, as we move forward, after we take a look at the proposals and have details based on those proposals and what the technical approaches are, after we've assessed those risks, when we make the award next spring, then my guess is that we'll have an opportunity to discuss for those offerers that did not receive awards, that how we will keep them in the game so that they can compete for phase 3, which would be our next launch service procurement in the future.
If I'm hearing you correctly, sir, are you saying that due to the amount of business that would be available, having three companies might not be sustainable, and it would be, in your view, healthier or better to have two companies that are healthy and able to move forward through this process?
Chairman, that's absolutely correct from the standpoint of the national security space portfolio. There are also commercial kinds of activities that other offerers could participate in. Whether or not the commercial industrial base in that time period will support three launch providers, I would have to take for the record and get back to you.
Thank you. That will be helpful. Thank you. Also, General, the Air Force has talked about the development of the next generation. I'm going to hold this question until the next round. I see I'm out of time. Thank you. Senator Heinrich, I'm not going to abuse my power.
We'll save that for another day.
Another day.
Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson used the term block buy in reference to the 60-40 split. So that begs the question, I think, to you, Ms. Chaplain. The Air Force has a long history of launch block buys. Can you describe those and what issues you saw in them in terms of pricing and competition that we should be thinking about?
Yes, like you say, it's been a long history. When they were about to do their last set of block buys, we reported on a lot of issues in terms of the knowledge not being there that they needed, pricing, cost, manifest, things of that nature. And those emanated from the nature of EELV and how it started as a commercial-like acquisition, that you couldn't obtain certain pieces of knowledge under the contracts that they had. But when you neck down to one provider, that became an issue. The Air Force did listen to our recommendations at the time, regrouped, got the knowledge it needed to make that block buy. But there's always a risk going forward if you're going to be awarding fixed price contracts with limited information and you somehow end up with one provider again, that you might be back in that same situation in terms of having the right insight. One concern we have with the approach going forward is there may not be enough commercial launches for three providers. There might not be enough to sustain two. So that's a question, given the demand on the DoD side and what assumptions we have about the commercial sector and how hard it is just to predict what's going to happen in the commercial sector.
Lieutenant General Thompson, J.T. Thompson, give us some insight into how you're confident that it will support two? And then, are you also confident that if these long-term blocks will be cost competitive?
So, Senator, in terms of why we're confident that we will be able to support two, is we know essentially the manifest that we have to support in the 2020 through 2024 timeframe in terms of when we would purchase the rockets, and that, or when we would purchase the services, and then from 2022 to 2026 when those rocket services would actually launch. We know that we have anticipated what the costs would be, and we're confident that we can support two with a 60-40 split through the National Security Space Launch Program.
And follow up to that, I'm trying to understand something that happened last week on March 20th. The Air Force released a notice of intent for early integration studies.
Yes, sir.
And all four contractors competing for launch services were listed, including SpaceX. Does that study reopen the opportunity for SpaceX or the next down selected to compete for federal funding, or what is the impact? What is the impact of that early integration study?
Senator,
listing
the
all
early
four contractors.
The early integration studies are basically a standard operating procedure that we use 3 years before we award a satellite launch. It's essentially low-dollar study money for vendors to be able to begin working with satellite providers to understand the satellites that are on the manifest that year and what the interface requirements and technical terms are between the rocket and the satellite, the launch vehicle and the satellite vehicle.
Let me switch to Space RCO. Obviously, what we used to call operationally responsive space, now Space RCO was really designed by Congress to be disruptive. And in fact, Congress had to fight the department from terminating the office, in my view, for most of a decade because it was so disruptive. Today, it seems that leaders in the Pentagon really value that disruption. So, Lieutenant General D.T. Thompson, I want to ask you if Space RCO were provided the appropriate resources, would they be able to conduct missions like building a network of small satellites in low Earth orbit with a mix of communications gear and sensors designed to detect hypersonic weapons?
Senator Heinrich, first of all, thank you for that question. And I would say up front, yes, that acquisition organization and any other organization with the right resources would be able to pursue that activity. If I'd like to take a few minutes and talk a little bit more about Space RCO. First of all, as you noted, with the help of Congress, we have succeeded in turning the operationally responsive space office into a true rapid acquisition organization. In addition, with the change directed by Congress, we re-architected and re-resourced the entire office. It is now focused on what I will call space superiority programs that don't have a home anywhere else in the acquisition enterprise today, but are urgently needed to help us with our defend and protect missions. We've got the people we need. We have resources. It is crafted and shaped after the Air Force RCO model with an Air Force Board of Directors led by the Secretary of the Air Force, streamlined authorities, streamlined decision-making processes. So it is up and running, effective, and helping us with our most urgent defend and protect priorities. But yes, it could also take on other responsibilities in that sense if appropriately resourced.
And Madam Chair, I apologize now. I've abused my time.
Never. Thank you, Senator. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For General J.T. Thompson, first of all, how many RD-180 motors do we have in hand right now?
So we currently have, I believe the number is 12. I can confirm that for the record for you, sir.
How many more do you intend to purchase?
There were 15, but in our most recent source selection, we awarded 3. So there's 12 remaining out of the 18 that we're authorized for National Security Space Launch Program.
So we had a total of 18 that we had authorized. You've currently used?
We currently use 6.
6 of them, so, okay. General D.T. Thompson, with regard to the command and control and the need for your cyber operations to be integrated within this. Where is the responsibility for the cybersecurity laid? Is that within a separate order, or are you finding that within the cyber mission forces that we have today?
Senator, actually, there's elements of both. First of all, inside of Air Force Space Command, inside of our operational squadrons today that are operating the satellite, there is a requirement for what we call mission defense teams, organic to those squadrons. They live and work on the cyber terrain, the command and control systems that we use to command and control the satellites today. They understand those systems deeply. They have special cyber training and special understanding of the systems to be what we would call the beat cops and the first line of defense under an initiative we call Defensive Cyber Operations for Space. That's Air Force Space Command responsibility. Then the next tier comes from the cyber mission forces that are organized under the Air Force today under Air Combat Command, but directed by U.S. Cyber Command. They take a broader look. They look at the threats out there. They work with those sorts of persistent threats, and they are also a resource we can bring in to help us when further expertise is needing or capabilities that they don't have. So it's a layered approach.
I know within your discussion points in your statements, there's clear evidence of the understanding of the multiple domains we have: air, land, sea, cyber, and space. We're prepared today, and we assume that we're in a position to defend within, as an example, the air domain, or the land domain, or the sea domain. And we know what that means in that we have weapons capabilities, we have defense capabilities, offensively and defensively, we're there. When you move into cyber, we have offensive and defensive capabilities. What does it mean in space? Are we in a position to where we are now acknowledging that as a domain, we have to have the same types of capabilities, both offensive and defensive capabilities, or are we restricting ourselves right now to defensive capabilities only?
So, Senator, I would say very clearly we've acknowledged with space as a warfighting domain, we have a special need to defend and protect the capabilities we have. Because we have those capabilities, we are so much better at using them and integrating them, and they provide us such an advantage. We know that first and foremost, we need to protect them because an adversary is going to try and take us away from them in conflict. What I would say is we also recognize we need to deny the use of space to an adversary. We will not restrict ourselves, and we do not restrict ourselves to any specific instrument or tool or medium. We need to be able to respond at the time, place, and in the manner of our choosing, and we have a lot of instruments in that regard. Certainly, I believe that probably the nation needs more discussion about what that might mean in the space domain itself.
Thank you. Ms. Chaplain, I'm just curious, when it comes to the, you laid out really a series of challenges that the Air Force has with regard to the operations within space, some in which we're being successful, some in which we're not. And we're recognizing in those where we have shut down some systems and so forth. Could you share just a little bit with regard to what you see as our capabilities for defending our space capabilities and the challenges that we have today? And I recognize this is not a classified setting, but is there a way that you can share with us what our needs are or what you see as areas that we're lacking today?
I can share a little bit. We recently did a review of cyber protection for weapon systems as a whole and found that for weapons in development, they can be easily hacked in the testing process. And a lot of that goes to pretty simple things like password management, cyber hygiene, patching systems, and there were some space systems included in our review. So while on one hand, there's a lot of attention being devoted to cyber, a lot of resources, the department understands the priority and is taking a lot of good steps now, I think there's a lot in the culture that needs to come a ways to just do the basic things that everybody has to do to protect their systems, and they're not expensive, and it would put the department in a much better place.
I would note that the Navy most recently had a similar review and came up with some surprising things as well. So
Yeah.
I would thank you,
Very
Madam Chair.
surprising.
Thank you, Senator. Senator King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to be argumentative, but I'm skeptical. I want somebody to explain to me why we need a Space Force, particularly when it's not going to include NRO, NASA, OSC, the private launch companies, missile defense. I mean, it strikes me as a solution in search of a problem.
Are you guys you really can't manage this now under the auspices of the Air Force? I'm not anti, but I'm skeptical, I guess.
So, Senator, I'll take a first shot at that. Fundamentally, we are concerned about the risk of losing our advantage in space.
So how does an organizational change of moving the boxes around affect that one way or the other?
Well, I would just go further in saying that when you look at the paradigm shift in terms of historically, we have operated in space in a permissive environment. We have tremendous dependencies and capabilities that are space-based or space-enabled. We now have adversaries, peer-level potential adversaries who are focused, quite focused. In fact, in 2015, both of them reorganized, China and Russia, their military for increased focus on their space capabilities. And they're looking at how they can negate our advantages in space.
I certainly understand that, and today's headline is India successfully tests satellite killer. I mean, that's this morning. And I understand the change in the dynamic and offensive and defensive capabilities. I just don't understand creating a new box with a new name within the Air Force increases our ability to deal with these issues. That's what I'm troubled by. I understand the challenge, and I understand the importance of meeting it, but I don't see why this, particularly when it's not comprehensive. There's a lot of the space infrastructure that's not included in this new entity. I'm just asking a kind of, perhaps I ought to ask your office, what does this gain us in terms of capability? It just seems to me it's drawing new boxes and having new people.
Sure. I think there's two sides to it. One is the threat side and needing to really focus people on that and prioritize it.
Are we not focused now?
Well,
The Air Force isn't paying attention to this now?
It's part of STRATCOM's mission to defend space, and it's the person running that mission has a lot of other priorities. So there's one thought to segment space and the defense of space to one individual, one organization. The other thought is just on the acquisition side. What we reported on is there's a lot of players involved in space. There's a lot of fragmentation, and you find that really affects the ability to get capability out quickly. There seems to be a lot of disconnects that happen just because of the way.
It seems to me that's a management challenge. And do you have an estimate of the incremental cost of creating this entity over and above current expenditures for all of these purposes? In other words, you understand what I mean, the incremental cost?
Yeah, I think DOD has done its cost estimates.
What's the number?
So the first year of the Space Force would be $72 million. At the end of the FIDIP at the FY24, it'd be up to $500 million annually. And you're talking about $2 billion total over the next 5 years.
But so $500 million a year, $500 million a year in organizational change. And I guess are you coming before us saying we can't manage this now and we need to spend $500 million a year? You understand what I'm asking, I'm sure.
I would say
Convince me that this makes some sense, that it's worth $500 million a year.
Again, the transition from operating in space in a permissive environment with all of the capabilities and dependencies to a warfighting environment really requires a focused approach. We're doing it at 3 legs of the triad, essentially. The first is the U.S. Space Command. That's the employment of the joint force, operational employment of the joint force on a day-to-day basis.
Is that going to go away under this proposal?
No, in fact, it will be it was recently directed by the President, and the confirmation of the commander of U.S. Space Command is pending with the Senate. I believe it arrived this week. So that's the employment of the force. The critical organize, train, and equip component is the service component. And that really is the doctrine, the training, the plans, the personnel development. It is the unified and singular focus on space as a warfighting domain that is very difficult to achieve unless you have that unified sole responsibility and custody.
I'm out of time, but I'd appreciate it if you could supply for the record a 1 or 2 page justification for the incremental cost of the organizational change and outlining what the tangible benefits will be of this change.
Yes, I will, Senator.
Because I think a lot of your capability now, and I'm not sure this is going to add anything. Thank you.
General Thompson, at one point you looked like you wanted to jump into this conversation. I think Senator King's looking for an answer, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator King, I'd like to add a little bit if I can. And certainly there are aspects of the need to fix some of the problems when you talk about the number of organizations and agencies and activities inside the department today that are focused on acquisition, that are focused on architecture and focused on some of them. We certainly need to bring some of that, unify it, give it the right purpose and synchronization and direction in a unifying step. The second is, as Secretary Rapuano mentioned, is the specific focus of a service staff whose responsibility is to organize the forces, train them, equip them, and present them for the warfighting purpose that in this case, usually the U.S. Space, in this case, the U.S. Space Command would operate. But I would also look at it as not just a, are we trying to fix a problem? It's a question of, is the nation prepared and are we organized to accept and take on the challenge that comes with space as a warfighting domain? And I would use as an example the 1947 and the formation of the United States Air Force. The War Department and the Army had done a tremendous job creating air capabilities that won World War II, strategic bombardment, air superiority, tactical support, and military transport. And so no one could argue that the War Department had not done a tremendous job in creating a space arm, but the nation decided at that time, as we look to the future, as the needs and the requirements and expectations that we expected of air power, it needed a separate service, it needed a proponent, it needed a 4-star advocate on the equivalent scale with the other services. And I would argue now's the opportunity for the nation to look at that, have that conversation, and decide if we're in a similar position to ensure that we're organized and structured appropriately to meet the challenges of the future. So not just a matter of, are we trying to fix problems? Is this the right structure for the nation going forward to address these challenges? Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, which nation's armed forces depend most on space?
So the United States leverages space more than any country in the world. Our partners and allies working with us in terms of those alliances and partnerships have their own developed capabilities, and we leverage and use them to force multiply our capabilities. So the Five Eyes, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the U.S., and a number of other partners have space-based capability as well. The South Koreans have some space capability, and it's multiplying. And as noted earlier, the commercial sector has exploded in terms of scope and scale of the activities and the speed of the development of capability. So you're seeing a proliferation of that technology now spreading much more rapidly than ever before.
So that's all good with our allies, but ultimately that comes back to the central position that space plays in the way we fight wars. What about our adversaries, Russia and China? How dependent are they upon space for their armed forces?
So China has expanded by orders of magnitude. The Russians have grabbed back. They have newly invested in space and have developed some relatively exquisite capabilities. But the scale of the Chinese investment is the lead in terms of everyone else out there, including Russia. They have more rocket launches this year than the United States. They're the lead rocket launch nation in the world.
How much of that Chinese investment is designed specifically to counteract the advantage that we had enjoyed in space over the years?
We are concerned that they are making significant investments to do that.
And there's no way to avoid space being central to our way of war, is there? I mean, some of it is a legacy based on our technological advantages going back to the early days of the space era. But it's also just the fact that we live in the new world and they all live in Eurasia, and we have to project power across a global scale, which depends on space. And secondarily, we've made the choice over the last 30 to 35 years to fight information-centric warfare. And I don't just mean long-range precision strikes or fancy cyber attacks. What does it mean to a private on the ground with a rifle if we lose dominance in space?
It's pivotal. Our targeting, our communications, positioning, timing, location for GPS, and then all of the ISR capabilities in terms of surveillance and reconnaissance that we get from space, real-time situational awareness of adversaries, locations, and activities. To lose those capabilities would be very significant, and that is why we are so focused on defending and protecting them.
Let's talk about defending them. Where are we today versus, say, where we were a year ago in our space assets? Are we more or less vulnerable to, say, a kinetic strike from an anti-satellite missile?
So we are improving our capabilities from investments that started several years ago. In fact, even late in the Obama administration, there were some significant investments, as you're aware, from this committee and others. In terms of the details of those activities, we could discuss that in a closed hearing.
More or less vulnerable to cyber attack, both in orbit and on the ground?
As noted earlier, we're very focused on the cyber piece. So we don't know what we don't know in some respects in terms of what an adversary may be doing, but we are hardening the entry points, and there are fewer entry points in space, some space systems versus other systems that are more connected and networked. So we're making progress there, but it's a priority, and we are continuing to approach it quite urgently.
More or less vulnerable to the kind of laser attacks that might dazzle or destroy a satellite system?
So we are concerned about ground-based effects on satellites, and we are seeing potential adversaries invest in them.
I raise these questions knowing that you can't get into the greatest detail in this open forum, but just to highlight the vulnerabilities of our space systems, both our sensors, but also the critical systems on which everyone in our military depends, to include that private out on the ground. We may not want to have a space race. We may not want to weaponize space or have weapons in space, but if our adversaries are competing there, we don't really get a choice whether we compete. We only get a choice whether we win or lose. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. Sorry, I was in another committee meeting before I got here, so I think this was covered, but I'm not sure. I wanted to ask, General Thompson, you highlighted a number, General John Thompson. I know there's two. Acquisition programs and reforms as part of the Space Missile Systems Center. I think you mentioned a 65% savings. A 65% savings in timeline that you laid out sounded good on surface. Was that correct in your statement?
Sir, I'm sorry. Could I ask you to rephrase the question?
The 65% savings in timeline, which was laid out.
Sure. Sir, thank you very much.
Okay.
So what you're referring to is a re-architecture that we've done to the Space and Missile Systems Center called SMC 2.0. When I arrived at SMC about 2 years ago, what I found was a bunch of outstanding people that really knew the space acquisition business, but they were organized very hierarchically and in stovepipes by mission area. There was very little crosstalk between major programs of record. Decisions took a long time to make because the decision packages had to fight their way up through the staff. What we have entertained now is an SMC 2.0 construct, which turns our, what I would refer to as an industrial age business model kind of organization into a new modern corporation, something like that you might see in Silicon Valley. So a much flatter organization. We've delegated authority down to senior civilians and senior military officers who know what they're doing. We've added 3 new program executive officers in addition to me and put them closer to the program offices so that they can make decisions faster. Making decisions faster, in many cases, what we've seen on major program of record milestone decisions is we've been able to save 60 to 70% of the time required by eliminating layers of the bureaucracy and getting those decision makers closer to the program office.
Let me just, maybe whoever wants to answer, but I think, John Thompson, you can stay, either one of you all. And with so many agencies out there, I'm concerned because on the cyber end of it, the espionage and things that's happening, there's so many basically smaller contractors. Once the main contract, then it goes, we don't seem to have good oversight or good controls of that with their security clearances and also the programs they're using. And that's where I think an awful lot of espionage has gone on, and a lot of cyber theft is going on, and I don't see anybody changing that or going after that total control on whoever. If you have an RFP and you have one of your big guys, that person should be held accountable and responsible for anybody and everybody they bring on board. And we're finding that's not the case.
So, Senator, thank you for that question. We are highly focused on the defense industrial base, all of those companies who support the development of Department of
I'm saying
Defense.
there could be 4 or 5 subs. This is just my information. We found out that a lot of you all that basically from the Department of Defense goes into the main contractor. And by the time that contractor goes down to subcontractors, they're all trying to protect their domain to give them a competitive edge on selling and making money. That's all fine. But the security of our country, you want to know why China's been able to ramp up so quick? This is loosey-goosey down here. They can almost pick up anything. And no one's tightening that up.
We are in the process of tightening that up. And part of it are the contract requirements that need to be modified to ensure that, that those who are performing on DoD contracts are required by the contract stipulations to ensure that cybersecurity.
I'm told that some of the smaller subcontractors don't have the wherewithals. So the prime should be held totally responsible to make sure that they have the wherewithals or they don't work with a subcontractor that doesn't. Nobody's holding anybody accountable because the prime can say, that's a subcontract. Well, that was subbed out to another sub. Does that make sense what I'm?
That is part of the challenge, absolutely.
You all
The
do
smaller-
recognize that that's a big problem.
We do recognize.
You recognize that basic China's rapid advancement has been because they've been able to tap in to some of our most strategic and confidential and high security information they've been able to get fairly rapidly, fairly easily.
We see it as a vulnerability, and we are focused on addressing it.
Anybody else want to comment on this? Please do.
Senator, that is a fantastic question, and we agree 100% with you.
What can we do to?
Sir, General D.T. Thompson and I happen to work with General J. Raymond, who is the current Air Force Space Command commander, and he has made it abundantly clear to both D.T. and I in very forceful manner that the situation that you state is unsatisfactory. We have a number of initiatives underway to battle exfiltrations of our weapons systems data from our cleared defense contractors and holding the primes accountable to ensure that their subs, whether they're 1 level down, 2 levels down, or 3 levels down, is one of the principal.
We're finding out that some of the primes have no idea, 3rd and 4th and 5th in the chain, who they are.
Sir, in the acquisition domain, specifically in the space portfolio, we are working after that. I would ask you to let me submit something in the record that gives you the details of that plan, and then perhaps if you're interested, we could go to another forum and talk about
Senator Rounds and myself have a subcommittee on cyber, and we're getting into procurement. This is a big thing with us right now because you just have to look back not that far to find out how China and others have been so successful at rapidly deploying and getting up to speed at a much quicker. You know, they say except for the second engine, their F-35 mimics ours to a T. There's no way to do that except be able to get all the pertinent information needed. Madam Chairman, we just have a terrific problem here, and it goes into the procurement, and it goes all the way down the chain. We don't hold the prime, which is the big boys. A subcontractor does not get a contract from them because they're not large enough to do it on their own, so they end up being a sub, and they're held hostage by the prime. The prime is not held accountable to the sub and what the sub's doing and how they secure their systems. And it goes down to 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tier. You really got a problem, and I think they realize it. It's been out there for quite some time, and so with your subcommittee and our subcommittee working together, hopefully we can make some major changes.
Hopefully, General Thompson, we'll get that information to you and to all of us, Senator Manchin, and then maybe we can follow up and do a classified so we can get in more to the details on it, if that would be helpful.
And we need to secure a setting, go in, hopefully to a skiff, and really get down to the nitty-gritty on this.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, I want to go back to something you said to Senator Cotton. You said that China has expanded its capabilities in space by orders of magnitude. I just want to dig into that a little bit more. The DIA produced an unclassified report this past January, Challenges to Space Security, in which it described a number of disturbing patterns of our competitors. China, it appears, is directing a Asia-Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, and I note that the rotating membership includes nations like Iran and Pakistan. Russia, this report says, has the largest foreign network of ground-based optical space surveillance sensors, and its Kellish Institute of Applied Mathematics coordinates sensor tasking and fuses information from nearly 100 ground-based optical sensors on 40 observatories spread across 16 countries. Is it fair to say that China and Russia have a coordinated international effort to threaten the United States in and from space?
With regard to complicity between China and Russia, less clear. But in terms of the objectives of both, of individually, China and Russia, absolutely. They are looking to asymmetrically undermine our space capabilities.
And this is a top priority for them, is it fair to say?
It's fair to say.
And the expenditures that you were detailing earlier, both on the Chinese and the Russian government side, shows a renewed emphasis for both of them on a modern-day space race. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Let me come back to something you said to Senator King. You're talking about the triad to approach this issue. You talked about U.S. Space Command. You talked about the service component. You didn't get to the third piece.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for asking. The third piece is really about the development, and that's where the space development piece comes in terms of SDA. And it is about really leveraging innovation. It's about leveraging commercial practices and capabilities that are developed on the commercial side. And it's really looking at the transformational capability set. So one of the areas that SDA will be focused on is a massively distributed sensor communications architecture in low orbit, in LEO, to be more resilient, degrade more gracefully under attack, and provide us more reliability, as well as reconstitution if we lose assets. And that would be a critical capability fill in terms of operating in a warfighting environment where we have adversaries who are looking to get at our assets.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Let me just ask you a budget question. Do you think your request for 56% increase in the space situational awareness part of the budget is sufficient to meet the threat that we're seeing from our adversaries?
So we are comfortable with the President's $14 billion request for the next fiscal. We believe that it covers our major requirement areas.
General David Thompson, let me ask you about another piece of the budget. It includes a request for a 115% increase in science and technology, which seems very, very wise given the scale of the challenge that we're facing. I just wonder, who have been your biggest partners in this effort, particularly in the research, private sector, and startup communities?
So, Senator, thank you. I would say right now what we're trying to focus on most is recognizing and understanding what's out in the commercial sector, the innovation that's there in the commercial market, the emerging commercial market. There are lots of companies there that are looking at, for example, large-scale constellations that might be fielded cheaply with tremendous capability. So we're currently looking for a couple of opportunities. One is the technology that goes with the low-cost space capability, the actual mission performance, whether it be remote sensing or it be satellite communications or things like that. But the third thing we're looking at is opportunities to partner with them for things like hosted payloads and other things that we might be able to use mission capability with. So it's especially focused on the investment you see in the burgeoning commercial space sector.
Have you encountered any particular difficulties in working with the private sector along these lines?
We have not. They certainly welcome and open to investment. Really what is the challenge on our part is twofold. First is picking the right places to invest for strategic purpose. And then obviously, as you talked about, there was certainly an investment there, but there are always more opportunities and needs than there are investment dollars. So making smart use of our investment dollars.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator, just as a quick addition to that, we've tried to create lower boundaries for entry for a lot of our commercial partners, our non-defense oriented, non-traditional partners that are bringing new innovative things to the table. One of our most successful vehicles is called the Space Enterprise Consortium. It's a consortium where we've invited and had join about 270 different contractors, small businesses, large businesses. About 80% of them are non-traditional, in other words, commercial space companies. We've been able to utilize that vehicle to do a lot of prototyping. We have over $200 million on contract for 37 different space prototyping efforts, and many of those, in fact, most of those, have a non-traditional component to them. So we're reaching out to the private sector looking for those innovative opportunities going into the future.
Thank you, Senator. General Thompson, I'm going to follow up with the question I was going to ask you earlier. We are going to do a second round here. The Air Force has really touted its development of the next generation of infrared early warning satellites as an example of its ability to rapidly acquire space capabilities in response to those warfighting demands. When announcing changes to the program last year, the Air Force stated its intention to cut 4 years off the procurement process. Can you talk about the progress you've made in meeting that ambitious goal?
Chairman, relative to the help that the Congress has provided us, the rapid prototyping authorities that we received through Section 804 have been a godsend. Using those rapid prototyping authorities from Section 804, we were able to put both layers, if you will, of our next-gen OPIR on contract within 6 months, saving at least a year of time from the standpoint of what we'd have had to do if we were conducting a traditional source selection. The process that we went through was simple, but also rigorous. In other words, we don't want to lose the oversight in our Section 804 prototyping efforts, similar to what Ms. Chaplin said earlier. We want to make sure that the rigor and the robustness of the oversight that we're providing our contractors is there from the get-go. We also want to make sure that our Board of Directors, the Congress, is kept fully apprised of what we're doing in our Section 804 rapid prototyping endeavors. On next-gen OPIR, we have a quarterly requirement to come over here, and I will tell you right now, if you want us to come more often than that, we will. We have triennial reports that we're submitting on all of our Section 804s, including next-gen OPIR, and our goal from Dr. Will Roper, who is the Service Acquisition Executive, is to offer so much transparency to the Hill on our 804 programs that you'll actually ask us, why are you doing this by the DoD 5000 series? We want some more of that 804 kind of execution.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your attention to the OPIR. It's an extremely important program, and I'm happy to see that it's advancing. Do you believe that the budget that's been presented, is that going to support that aggressive schedule that you're on right now?
Chairman, the requirement is for 2025 to have an initial launch capability. We originally envisioned being able to go as fast as 2023. However, the costs in the budget were just not able to make us to that gold medal level. So we still consider the fact that we've accelerated the program a little over 2 years at this point, and we believe that the 20 budget and out fully supports that. However, there are 2 above-threshold reprogrammings that we have been trying to work through the department and over here on the Hill, one for FY18 and one for FY19. Obviously, we missed the President's budget before we had the requirement to accelerate to 2025, And so we're still looking for about $600 million worth of above-threshold reprogrammings that we're working very closely with the department and the Hill. The FY18 ATR was approved by the Hill, thank you for that, but not all the sources were. So we're trying to get the sources in line, and then a $400 million above-threshold reprogramming in 19 is still required to meet the 25 need date.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Chaplin, I understand that the GAO recently completed an assessment of the department's space acquisition workforce and see that some of your findings are described in your testimony. If you could just, in the remaining time, talk a little bit about the difficulty in tracking and identifying acquisition professionals working on space programs. This isn't really a clear and distinct group of people, is it? You kind of referenced that in your opening remarks.
Right. I think the department's pretty good at tracking acquisition professionals in certain lines of effort, like program management, certain types of engineering. And what the department as a whole doesn't do is track acquisition professionals tied to certain missions like space. So the fact that they couldn't do this for space isn't unusual. It's sort of an issue across the department. But we believe that maybe we do want to add some fields to the databases that track people so that we can help identify who is in space, especially if we're going to move together some organizations. Also in our review, we came across comments and concerns about gaps in expertise in certain areas for space, mostly in the technical things, and trying to keep people on for long periods of time and get professionals in at the mid-level. And those are persistent concerns that we've reported on over the years. I know there's been a lot of effort to strengthen the workforce, but it's still an issue for space.
Okay, thank you. Senator Heinrich.
One of you mentioned space situational awareness a few minutes ago, and that in conjunction with the open source reporting that Senator King mentioned about India and their ASAT test today got me thinking about, I think it was 2007 when we went through the initial Chinese effort at this that scattered junk all over low Earth orbit and made a mess for everyone. What do we know at this point, or what can you share in this environment? Any thoughts on the Indian story, but more importantly, do we need some sort of international structure, a space code of conduct, for example, to make sure that if nations are going to test, they're going to do it in a way that doesn't create the kind of enormous problems which led, in many cases, to the kind of funding that we have to put into space situational awareness today?
Senator Heinrich, thank you. I'd like to, if I can. I'll talk to you a little bit about the Indian ASAT test that did occur this morning. First of all, we were aware that it was coming because of some flight bans that India had announced and some information they had published previously. But the launch occurred at 1:39 a.m. Eastern Time. And first of all, let me say clearly, it was detected and characterized and reported by Air Force systems, missile warning systems, and our airmen at Buckley Air Force Base. Immediately after the test, it struck the target vehicle. The Joint Space Operations Center and the Air Force's 18th Space Control Squadron began collecting information about the breakup of the vehicle. Currently, they're tracking about 270 different objects in the debris field. Likely, that number is going to grow as the debris field spreads out and we collect more sensor information.
Do we know what the elevation of the debris field was at the breakup?
Senator, we do, but I'm going to ask to pass that in different channels. I'm not convinced I know that that's an unclassified fact.
Okay.
But we do know the altitude at which it occurred. And we immediately started providing public notice on our Space Track website and will provide direct notification to satellite operators if those satellites are under threat. I will also say at this point in time, the International Space Station is not at risk. That's another thing that we do and provide warning routinely. But that's just an example of No other nation, no other military force, no other civil or other body could have detected, characterized, and begun warning and providing the world the way we do with Air Force and other joint assets. And so that represents a tremendous capability, but we have more investment to turn that from what I'll call a matter of routine space flight safety approach to searching and finding and detecting threats who are attempting to hide us as well.
Do you want to touch on the issue of whether or not we need to engage in some sort of multilateral effort to ensure that someone doesn't make the kind of mistake that China made back in 2007? Do we need some parameters where people agree to, for example, not test at very high altitudes?
I would say, certainly in a broad sense, and this will be a specific example, there's a lot of work to do with the rest of the world on what are established norms of behavior, rules of engagement, and the code of conduct in space. And I know that's a matter that the State Department and the Department of Defense and led by OSD is working with the rest of the world. It's certainly a need that we all need to address. And I'll ask, I don't know if Mr. Rapuano wants to add more in that regard, but it's a need.
We are involved with discussions internationally, and we have participated in a non-binding confidence-building measures associated with activities in space. We are certainly proponents of safe and sustainable space and minimization of space debris. So that is an active and ongoing conversation.
I'm getting close to the end here, and given that I went over earlier, I'm not going to make that mistake twice. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
I just want to reiterate the point that Senator Manchin was making. I've been in numerous hearings. Every single CEO, Secretary of State, whoever is sitting where you're sitting, you say, how's your cyber protection? We're good. We're safe. None of them know that. And so I want to urge you, if you go to one of your prime contractors and say, how's it going, or if you get a contractual assurance, don't believe it. My suggestion is red teaming them. There's nothing like skull and crossbones that appears on the CEO's computer screen that says, congratulations, you've been hacked by the U.S. Air Force. Your award is the termination of your contract. I mean, we've got to be aggressive about this, because to accept assurances is just, everybody gives you those assurances. They don't really know, and they don't know until they've been tested, and you have the capability of doing that. The Pentagon has done bug bounty programs and red teams. I urge you to do this. The intellectual property theft via subcontractors, as Senator Manchin was talking about, is the new frontier. And it just came up this morning in a hearing with the Navy. And we've had it with secretaries of state. We've had it with CEOs of utilities. There were just some cases. The Wall Street Journal had a major story about a third-generation sub for a utility. You know, it was a headhunter or something, got up into the control system of the utility. So I urge you to not take assurances, but to be aggressive about this. And I think a red team approach is one that could maybe put the fear in them. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator King. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their attendance and their good questions today. Thank the panel for the information you've provided. If members do have questions, I hope that you will respond in writing and be able to get those to us in a timely manner. With that, the hearing is adjourned.